weird things have been happening with this computer, my computer here. And Mr. Corrigan helped me during lunch, and we've now just about got the other one set up. The only thing is, literally, other than an operating system, there's nothing on it. All right, so I'm going to have to go and download some stuff. So that probably won't be ready until Monday. All right, so. Now, what we started on yesterday, if you weren't here, was we went over this started going over this ASP.NET free course. All right, that's from DotNetOdyessy.com. It is a 12-part series. All right, we went through parts 1, 2, and 3 yesterday. I'm not going to go over part 1 again. It would be silly to do that. That was just a rehash, kind of showing you how the web works. All right. Part 2, or Chapter 2, Lesson 2, whatever it's called, showed you how to build an ASP.NET MVC application, but it was so elementary, it was kind of foolish. But what I am going to do is I'm going to move over to Part 3. All right, so again, we don't need how the web works. We don't need your first application. But I'm going to go back to this one. I'm going to skip everything except when we start to create the actual IMDb movie application. I want to go over that again. The chapter itself was so kind of cut up that I think hopefully that this will help to do this. So I'm literally going to go and take this from the top, but I'm only going to do the IMDb stuff, and I'm actually going to start a new project here. Again, remember, what I asked you to do this summer, I asked yesterday how many of you had done it, and it was 3 out of 10. All right. I asked you to uninstall Visual Studio 2017 and install Visual Studio 2019. I told Mr. Corrigan, I asked him to guess. I said, how many people do you think did it? He goes, none. I said, no. He was like, really? So he was happy. All right. He didn't ask me who it was, but he was just happy that it was done. And I said, yeah, and I gave you guys some time yesterday. Now, again, the screenshots in this are going to look different than 2019's because this was done in 2013. I do believe that the screenshots in our textbook are, I think, from Visual Studio 2015. So again, it's going to look different, but I'd still want you to be using the latest and the greatest. All right? Now, depending on how much we get done today, but probably no later than tomorrow, we're going to set up our environment for this class. Now, it's not going to matter that we're not going to have some stuff for what we're working on now, but before we actually go into the book in earnest, so to speak, all right, we're going to have to do some stuff to set up the environment. My hope is between today and tomorrow, we'll get done with this entire series, all 12 of these lessons, all right? Then on Friday, what we're going to do, just as something a little different, rather than going into Chapter 2, where they actually do build an ASP.NET MVC application, we're going to do that Monday. But what we're going to do on Friday is we're going to do a bootstrap exercise as a class. And rather than a test on Chapter 2, I'm going to ask you to take that exercise, use it as a starting point, and make some changes to it. All right, just so you kind of know what's coming up, so to speak. All right, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to choose ASP.NET Web Application, just like we did yesterday. I don't know why they did that. It did. All right, and I'm going to call it Micro IMDb V1. All right. And I'm going to put this on the desktop. It shouldn't be a problem. I cleaned up the desktop this morning, so. And I'm going to just call the solution name the same thing. All right. We went over a lot of this stuff yesterday. Whoops. Sorry. So micro, that's because I pressed back instead of create. All right, this is to be an empty project, but with MVC selected. We talked about this yesterday. I gave you examples yesterday of going empty with MVC versus choosing MVC with MVC, and you saw the differences. All right, I have put all the lectures from yesterday are out there on the YouTube channel. Okay, it's interesting because this has never happened to me before. I find it interesting. You may not, but I produced the three lessons, the three lectures I did this morning, and every one of them came up and said video unavailable. I've never had that happen before. The production process worked, but it's saying that there's an error in them. So that's going to be interesting. I hope that doesn't happen today. All right. So again, just kind of as a quick little review, since we set it up as an MVC project but empty, that means that our controllers folder is there but it's empty, our models folder is there but it's empty, our views folder is there but it only has a local web.config in it. In addition, under the app start, we've got our route config that we talked about yesterday. We don't have our bundle config and whatever that other one was. All right, so we only have a certain percentage of what was created had we not done it as an empty project. All right. So they want us to add a new controller in here. They want it to be an empty controller, and they want the name of it to be movie. All right. Again, we right mouse. You'll always do it this way. You'll right mouse click on the controller folder. You'll choose add. You'll choose controller. All right. It's meant to be empty, so I'm going to click add, and they want it to be called movie controller. All right. Now, I want to explain something to you. You might find this a little bit hard to understand right now, but I just want you to hear it. Different books, different authors will write these kind of applications in different ways. Does that make sense? All right. With some authors, what they will do is they will take some of the files that normally would go in a models folder and they'll put them into a different folder. They have their reasons for doing it. All right. So what I'm telling you is when we go through the project that's in the book and we do that as a class, which starts in chapter 7, I'm going to follow to the law, the letter, everything the author does. But when we do our own project, we're going to end up doing it a little bit differently than that. All right. So you saw this last time, or yesterday. We talked about this. We mentioned that everything that's in here that's in gray is not being used. So we can click on the light bulb and say remove unnecessary listings. Okay. We do need the using system.web.mvc because that's where this is defined. All right. So that's why you need that. That's why that one is blackened out already. And again, with the namespace, name of the project, dot, name of the folder. All right. And that's where we are. The name of the project, the name of the folder. All right. We just came in and we created a controller. All controllers, as I mentioned yesterday, all of them inherit from the controller class. We called it movie controller. So again, it inherits from the controller class. All right. Again, nothing new in there, but it just bringing that up for review. So in the handout here, they explain all that. All right. And the author also goes through and says that by default, when you create a controller, what gets returned is an action result. And an action result can return almost anything or nothing. What he had you do, I don't remember if it was this lesson or what, I think it was in the last lesson, is he had you change this to a string, and we just like return welcome to MVC or something like that. All right, we're not doing that. We're going over and above here. As I mentioned, all controllers derive from the controller base class. The name should always end with controller. All right, and by default, it's going to return an action result, which, as I mentioned, can return a lot of different things. So the first thing they want, or next thing they want us to do in here, is to right-click inside of that action method and choose Add View. Again, I did this yesterday. So I'm coming right inside. I can be right on the word index, right mouse click, and choose Add View. Notice that when I do that, automatically it's smart enough to say, oh, you're in the index. I'm going to give it that name. It is not mandatory that it has that name. Typically, it technically is mandatory. In other words, what I'm saying is this right here is going to call this right here. This is the index method of moviecontroller.cs. This is the index.cs HTML file that's part of the views, and under the views, under the movie folder. All right, and if that doesn't make sense, I mean, you're going to see it in just a minute. Now, I don't remember, I think I scoofed this up yesterday. Index empty, and they want us to uncheck use a layout page. So index empty, oops, empty without model, and no use a layout page. All right, so that's the way it's supposed to set up. So this dovetails with what you see right here. All right, so as it says, the name of the view is index. We're not going to change it. All right, it will create a view file with the same name. In other words, it'll be index.cshtml. And one of the things we discussed yesterday, I asked her this question, and by and large you were able to answer it. A CSHTML is an HTML file that has C# code in it. Normally, again, it won't be classes and stuff. It'll be just a certain amount of code that's necessary to do whatever it is you want to do. All right. And the author says we're leaving that model empty without model because we haven't talked about models yet. We uncheck the page. And what that does then, when I click Add, is if you look up on the screen right now, in Movie, there's nothing in there. There's no check mark in there, or one of those arrows. So we know it's empty. But as soon as we check Add, you'll notice how there, that's underneath there now, index.cshtml. Because we did not ask for it to use a layout page, it sets layout equal to null. Okay? And we talked about this a little bit last semester, but I do want to make sure you understand it. You wouldn't say their layout equals 0. It wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't say layout equals the empty string. You wouldn't say layout equals false. All right? A layout is more or less kind of like an object. And to say that it's not set, that's when you use null. You can set almost any kind of variable to null. All right? Which again means unknown. All right, so we've got this where we're basically saying we're not using a layout, and this is basically stuff that we had in our first semester. They wanted us to come in here and type in movies list and then run the program. Now again, it may not come up and run the way I want it to, and if it doesn't, it's okay. It's smart enough that, notice since I ran it from where I am, it went to movie index. All right? And hopefully it's going to say movie list when it gets all done. There you go. All right? So right now, basically, it's done almost nothing. All right. The next thing in here, it says run the application and access the URL. Well, if you look in here, this is what they talk about being in that in our route config file. So let's take a look in our route config file. All right, if we look in here, you'll notice it says home. We do not have a home controller. Normally, in this, you have a list of routes that you want to follow. And virtually all of the time, the last one that you put in there, the very last route that you list, will be the default route. It'll be the one that if nothing else matches, you'll go to that one. they want us to come in here and change this to movie. In other words, if we don't specify any controller, it'll default to the movie controller. All right? If we specify the movie controller, but we don't specify a method to run, by default, it'll run the index method. And although I kind of glossed over it yesterday, I want to say this again. This right now doesn't mean anything. We're not using anything with that parameter. But think about this. All right? What we're going to get to very, very shortly, we talked about this already, is CRUD. All right? So when you think about it, when we are coming in here and we're updating and we're deleting, when we're doing those, usually you'll be updating or you'll be deleting a single record at a time. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, if you are doing some kind of a website, you're not going to be updating everything at once typically. All right, but if you've got products, you're going to update a product at a time. The reason I bring that up is that's when this will become more important, because you'll want to be passing the ID of the current record in to an update routine or to a delete routine. So you only update one record, or so you only delete one record. All right. So the advantage of doing what we did right here is now the system is smart enough that it knows, hey, if we come in here, when we did this before, it came up and it said /movie/index. You may or may not have noticed, and it's not that important, but notice now it's grabbing all the defaults. So by just saying localhost followed by a random port number, it's the same as though we put in movies. Okay, make me a layer. Oh, it's movie. I'm sorry. Movie. All right. Or as if we said movie index. And you'll notice that in all three of those cases, we get the same result. So why am I spending this time going over this? I want you to start understanding that at the heart of doing MVC is understanding the routing mechanism that's going on here. All right? And once you set it up, it's kind of like, this came to my mind. I don't know if it's a great analogy. It's probably not. But it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys did this, but I remember when we had our last day of school, we'd have a field day. All right, you know, when you have games and stuff like that, and sometimes they'd make an obstacle course or something along those lines. Well, imagine that's kind of what we're doing here. But the idea is if you set up an obstacle course and you set it up once, you don't have to constantly be setting it up over and over and over again. All right, and that's basically what the routing mechanism is doing for us. All right. Then the next thing that we were asked to do is to change this so that instead of just saying movies list, they wanted us to bold movies list, add a line break, and then add 4 or 5 movies, but put them inside of a table. Now, again, they have not talked about models yet. They have not talked about the word database yet. So what they are doing is they're coming in to their index.cs HTML file, and they're hard coding that information in. You're all smart people in here. You all realize that if this was the real IMDb database that could conceivably have millions of movies, you wouldn't do it like this. That would be silly to do that. Instead, as you added, movies and then added more movies and then added more movies, some data entry person would put that stuff in a file. You'd run the file against your program, and it would add more stuff for you. All right. Let's make sure I didn't make any mistakes. So there it is. Again, bless you. Everything we've done thus far, I think I said this yesterday, but everything that we've done thus far, we could have done this without MVC, without ASP.NET, because really, basically, all we've done right now, all right, we've got a controller calling this, but this is just HTML. All right. Let's see. All right. So as it says, we have just showed the list of movie titles along with the year and the rank. What if we have this information in a list object or from a database? Well, that's typically how you will have it. All right. That's what we're going to move toward. All right. As we go on. Now it says Razor answers this question. I went over this yesterday. I didn't go over the code, but remember what Razor is, for lack of better words. It's the C# that you go and you create inside of a .cs HTML file. It can be very powerful. It can include a lot of different stuff. In other words, it can include whatever you need it to do. All right. So they had you go in, and again, I'm not going to do this, create a simple project. The big takeaway here is this starts a Razor block. All right. And then putting in the curly brace followed by the @ sign ends a Razor block. All right. And they went through, this is all stuff, we've done this kind of stuff before. You did the guess the number game. This is simpler than that. This is generating a random number, dividing it by 2, and if it comes out evenly, saying that it's even, otherwise it says it's odd. All right, so I walked you through that code yesterday, but I didn't run it. All right. Again, there's also a for each statement. We did talk about that, maybe not a lot, but there's a key thing for you to realize regarding the for each statement is anything that you put in a for each, it's designed like a for loop. But if I'm coming in here and I'm working with, let's say, as this is a list, an array of prime numbers, you cannot change the values in the array in a for each loop. Did you all hear that? If your desire is to change the values, so let's say I wanted to run through this and I wanted to add 10%, maybe there was a 10% cost bump up for whatever reason. So I wanted to add 10%. You have to use a regular for loop for that. You can't use a for each. All right. So as it says, back to our micro IMDb application. Equipped with this Razor knowledge, notice what they're going to do. It says, let us rewrite the code using Razor. Previously, they hard-coded everything in, and not only did they create an HTML table to do it, but they just keyed in the elements. Let's look at what's different now. All right. They are coming back, and on the top of this, they're going to create what you see right here. And actually, it's a little longer, but let's just go through it a line at a time. As it says, this var movie1 equals new. All right, what the heck is that? Basically, it's the equivalent of you're creating a movie class. And the movie class has 3 fields in it. A rank field, a title field, and a year released field. All right? So we're creating 5 variables of that type. In other words, we're taking the same data that I showed you up above that we put in HTML, and we're putting it in now, but we're putting it in as C# variables. After we create those 5 variables, we say, hey, let's create a list. Now, we worked last semester, we worked with arrays. We didn't work too much with lists. All right? So what's the big difference between these? Typically, when you work with arrays, you have arrays of simple data types. An array of ints, an array of floats, an array of bools, etc. All right? But a lot of times, either A, when you're working with objects, or B, all right, not only if you're working with objects, but you want to iterate with them, and you're possibly going to use them, for example, with databases, you'll use lists. All right, so we're going to end up using them a lot. So I'm going to grab these lines of code. I'll grab everything. And notice they put that right before the HTML stuff. So in other words, That's inside of here by the curly. So right there. There it is. All right. And now that we've done this, we now have the equivalent of rank, title, and year. So in other words, in here, where we have rank, title, and year, we still need these because those are our headings. But we don't need any of this. That is going to be replaced in just a second with our razor code. All right. Now we're still going to have the TR, etc., because we want a row at a time. But the idea is when we get done, and I make this last change in just a second, and we run this, it should look exactly like it did before when we ran it, and we ran it based off of an HTML table with just HTML in it and regular text. So, oops. So what we change is this. And again, you're all smart people. You should all be able to look at this and figure out exactly what's happening. It's a for each. So in other words, we're going through all the movies in that movie list. So it'll go through all 5. For each one, it's going to make a new table row. And it'll display what? The rank, followed by the title, followed by the year. It'll get down, it'll do a line break, it'll go up and do the second one. And that's exactly what it's going to keep doing. So I'm going to grab this code. And I'm throwing it right here. I think that's where it goes. We'll find out shortly. But I'm going to do a file, save all. And I mentioned yesterday, it's important here, really, get used to saving often. It's just really a good idea. All right. Not only that, you may have done this last semester. You may not have. But we talked a little bit last semester in the chapter that was the C# chapter that was on debugging about going in and building a solution. There are going to be times before you do something, you'll have to build a solution because that's working on some system files behind the scenes. And if you don't do that, the system won't have any idea of what you're trying to do. So I did the file save all. I'm going to run it. And in an ideal world, at least, this is going to look exactly the same as it just did before. And it does. Except somehow I've got an extra curly brace in there, but that's fine. All right. But the point is, when you look at it, it looks the same as it did earlier. But we have replaced just putting text in there in our HTML with actual using razor code. All right. Let's see if I can figure out where that. Oh, there it is. Oh, did you notice this? I'm going to put the error back in there. Oh, I screwed it up. I had one too many curly braces in here. Everybody see that? Notice it made it yellow. What you're going to find is it's either going to do that or over here in your gutter area that's right there. When you make mistakes, it'll be red. It'll show you an error in here if you have your error window open. But a lot of times when you're working, you'll have a bunch of stuff open in here. You won't want to have the error window open. So you can go into this gutter area, double click on whatever's red. It'll take you then right to where the error is. All right, I'm going to get rid of that. All right, I'm going to save and just run it one more time. This is kind of an interesting thing, okay? In my opinion, it's an interesting thing. What we're changing in here is the .cs HTML file. Everybody see that? That's the one we're changing. Since we're changing a .cs HTML file and not changing a .cs file, we can go right back into our running program here and just refresh it. If you make a change to a .cs file, you have to recompile the program. But if you make a change to a .cs HTML file, you don't have to recompile the program. You can, but you don't have to. All right? Okay, get rid of that. As it says, now the code has become dynamic. Okay? It says, important note, just to demonstrate the razor for each loop, we have added the movies in the view itself. Normally you wouldn't do it that way. All right? this whole thing so far has not been really model view controller. There's been no model. In fact, earlier all we were doing was controller for everything. Now we've got the controller and we've got the view. All right. Any questions on anything we've covered yesterday in those first two and redoing the majority of the chapter 3.1? Any questions? Yes.
So if this runs HTML and it also runs ASP.NET, is the idea that you want us to, like, when we're working on our portfolio or whatever, you want us to use this instead of
No.
like a different thing?
No. This is the kind of thing you would use if you could use if you were creating your own website. All right. I would not. It's not that you couldn't. You could. I'm sure you're smart enough. You could go back and redo your portfolio like this. I wouldn't do it. I'd keep your portfolio. Ideally, I think you should go back and redo your portfolio. If right now it's just done in straight HTML, you should go back and do it Bootstrap. All right, because one of the things that that's doing is if when people start looking at it, they're going to right mouse click on it and they're going to do a view source code. They're going to want to see what your stuff looks like. And if you show that you know Bootstrap, hey, they're going to expect if you're applying for a web job, you know HTML, you know CSS, and you know JavaScript. Because if you don't, you sure as heck really probably shouldn't be applying for it. But if you can have it set up nicely with Bootstrap, that's just one more thing that you're able to show the person that you know or whoever is possibly going to hire you. All right. So the next chapter is part 4, and it says layout in ASP.NET MVC. All right. It says while adding view for the action method, we have unchecked the use a layout page. You already saw this. As I mentioned, what that did at the top is it put in a razor C# statement that said layout equal no, meaning you don't have a layout. All right, and that's what the author is saying right here. All right, it says we have unchecked this option as we don't know what a layout page is and how it will help us in making the web application better, so to speak. It says, let me explain. Add another action method called movie of the month. So in other words, what we want to do, anytime you see something like this that says add another action method, that you just put into your head, it's going into the controller. Because that's where action methods go. All right, so we want to go into our movie controller and we want to add this. If you are following along and you're doing this, I would suggest you just copy it right from here. All right, I started doing it myself where I was literally keying everything in. I just started making mistakes. All right. So I'm jumping back up here. I'm going back to the movie controller. It really doesn't matter. In other words, right here, I could have put this one first. There is nothing to do with the fact the order. Okay. Also, when you look at this, hopefully this kind of puts into your mind a couple things. First of all, we've got a new method. The method's called movie of the month. You can all see that. All right. But if you look up on the screen here, there is no in our views, there is no method of the month. So right now, this particular thing is doing nothing. It's got return view, but there's no view to return. Does that make sense, everybody? It's not doing anything. We're going to add something to it right now. All right? So it says right-click again inside, choose Add View. Make sure, again, the layout page is unchecked as we did before. All right? And it'll add that code, and the only thing we're going to add in here, we're going to change the title to Movie of the Month. You say, well, you said that too fast. All they're saying is this. Right mouse click where it says Movie of the Month. All right, right mouse click, choose Add View. It's called Movie of the Month. It should be empty. There's no model class. There's no partial view. And since we unchecked it last time, it keeps whatever we had last in there. That's what we want. All right, and we're going to click Add. Then they tell you the title should be Movie of the Month, and it already is. Now, everybody, again, I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. But you're all, again, you're all good enough, you're good enough students that you know this right here, that title is what's going to appear up here, right, in our tab. So there's nothing wrong with doing that and putting some spaces in there so it's easier to read. I just made it 4 words instead of 1 word. You don't have to do that. But the reason I'm telling you that is don't do it with that one. Does that make sense? That's the name of a method. If you make that into 4 different words, it has no idea what you're trying to do. And I can guarantee you'll get an error message from it. All right? And I don't even know if in here, if they tell you to change it so it's movie of the month like that. It doesn't matter. All right? So the author says, I have added the below code in the view within the div to show the movie of the month to the user. All right, so let's take a look at this. I'm going to put it in. I'm going to run the program to make sure it works. Then we'll go back and look at every line that's in it. All right, so they wanted, not there, I'm sorry. Where are we? There. There we go. Inside the div, they want us to put that. Okay, now a couple things about this. Okay, first of all, look at that. Movie of the month, at movie of the month, title. Well, now I do have to go back and change it. See that movie of the month? It's grabbing that from what we did, or from what we did up above. In other words, it is grabbing it from here. I didn't notice that. I think that's what's screwing this up. So let's go back and try to change it. See if that fixes it. All right. It still might. Don't worry about it. Period. But what I want you to get out of that, I'm going to move all this over so you can see what's going on. It doesn't hurt at all doing this. All right. I'm just putting most of this stuff on its own line so you can see what's going on. All right. This is kind of silly, and what I mean here is, what all they're doing is they're saying, oh, that's the movie of the month. Now that, one second, that's typically not what you do. Remember that random number thing we did earlier? You typically generate a number for between 1 and the number of movies they had, and you'd pick one that way. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
The space after that at is supposed to be there?
No, it is not. All right, yeah, looks like that got rid of everything. That's why, now I bet you I can do this. Thank you. There we go. All right, it doesn't matter whether you do it that way or you don't do it that way. All right, now I mentioned this to you before, okay? Now if you look on the screen, please, couple things. First of all, if I just run this program, so I'm just running it right now. Notice where it went to. It went to the method that I currently have active. Okay? Does that matter? No, but I'm just telling you that. By default, that's the way that this will work. All right? And as we go in here, another way that you can do this is I could have just went to movie of the month, right mouse clicked, and said view in browser, and I would have gotten the same result. You can. Is there an advantage or a disadvantage? No. All right. So I don't want to sit and read this to you, but what the author says here is normally, like I just mentioned, you wouldn't just grab a movie and say that's your movie of the month. All right, you would make, what's the best way? Think about this. If this, let's say this is a video store, the best way you could probably do it would be to look at sales for each movie for the month. Query and find out which movie was requested the most or taken out the most. And that probably would become your movie of the month. All right, that's pretty much what they're saying here. Okay, so we now have 2 action methods in our micro IMDb V1 application. We've got the indexed action method, which just displayed the list, and we've got our movie of the month, which displays our mythical movie of the month. All right. Now, it says now we want to show some banner image at the top of the page. We're not doing anything original here. Most websites have a section like that. All right. So they have something like that. It says to do this, we need to make changes on every page. I'm asking you this question, and I'm going to even give you the answer, but you have to look at it. All right. The answer is on the screen. Okay. Why do I have to make changes in every single CSHTML file as opposed to changing it in one place? What do you see in line 3? What does that mean? There is no layout. So those two files, the index.cshtml and the movieofthemonth.cshtml, are not sharing a layout because there isn't one. So if I make changes in one of the files and I want the other one to look like it, I've got to go back and make those same changes in the other file. It's almost identical, and it basically is identical. Remember first semester, we'd make a website with 3 different HTML files in it, 3 web pages, an index page, an about page, and a contact page. And we would take our header and all of our stuff in our header section, we'd copy it 3 times, right? We don't want to do that. You don't have to do that when you're using server-side programs like PHP, like ASP.NET, etc. This will involve us making some changes to what's here, all right, just so you know. All right. Somebody stop me, please, when we get to about 1:30, and I'll give you to take your first break then. All right. So the author says, yeah, and imagine if we had, I have no idea what this looks like, but imdb.com. This is what this is based off of, okay? And when you look at it, I don't know if each one of these is a different page or not. Let's suppose that they are, all right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. That's not a lot, maybe even 6 pages, okay? That's not a lot, but do I want to take the same thing and copy it in 6 times when I don't have to? I'd rather take the same thing, put it in once, and use it 6 times. And that's what they're talking about doing right here. So as it says, layout solves this problem by defining the structure of the page. It makes sure that there is a consistency between pages. All right. You actually saw this yesterday. I don't know if you remember, but when I created the project where I called it full, where we didn't have the empty project, we had the other one. Every time we went to the home page, the contact page, and the about page, the top was always the same. I even changed it, if you remember, from application name, I put my own name in there. All right. So back in the olden days, all right, and what I mean is when they had ASP.NET web forms, when those were used, what you put up here, and quite often here, and quite often down here, so a header, possibly, some kind of a side section, and a footer, if they were going to be the same on every page, you'd create what was called a master page. And that master page would contain this and this, so your header, your aside or whatever it would be, and your footer. And then you'd create every other page based off of that master page. Because then you'd already have the header, the footer, and that side section created. And that's what they're telling you in here. All right. So the author says we have top section where we may have links to top level categories. We have links of subcategories, etc. When you click, you might want to have something happen, etc. The author says if you go out here, there's an example. Funny thing is what they reference here, this isn't even active anymore. All right. So don't if you click the links and stuff, nothing magical is going to happen. But what we want, as it says in both of our views right now, the index.cshtml, the movieofthemonth.cshtml. And again, Views. As soon as you see views, and as soon as you see this, you should automatically know that'll have a .cs HTML extension, as will this. Those are the kind of things that just have to, for lack of better words, kind of get ingrained in your head. All right? So as it says, we have assigned layout equal null at the top of each one. All right? And it says all the information for that page would be rendered from that view itself. As discussed earlier, if you want to change something, you need to make changes in all the pages, ideally. What we want to do is we want to be able to, for example, update our layout once and have a change for every page that uses that layout. And again, that should just make sense to everyone. When you select empty MVC template, it creates a layout for us by, not by default, but by default. But we decided not to use it. And that's what happened when we unchecked it. It says, so how can we do it right now? All right. It says we have to make 2 changes. Let's make these 2 changes and take a break. Number 1, we're going to comment out the line that says layout equal none. We're going to comment that line out. So let's do them in order. So we have to do it twice, once for each one of these files. This one here, oops. And notice we're using C# comments because we're commenting out C# code. All right, so there's the first one. And there's the second one. So that's the first thing that they want us to do. Second, it says remove all generic code not specific to the view. In English, that says any code that can be shared between those 2 .cs HTML files should be put in its own file. That's exactly what it's saying. All right? So it says, after making the changes, the index.cs HTML should look like this. Well, I want to make sure mine does, so I'm just going to grab all of it here. All right. I'm going to go back to my index.cs HTML file, and I'm going to go and just put that in. All right. It probably already looked like that, but that's fine. I don't care. Okay. Now, well, we just made a big change. We probably should go back there. It looks like, again, we're going to go back and try to rerun it, make sure that we haven't broken it. Always a good thing to do. So I'm going to go back to my code here, File, Save All, and I'm going to run it. Again, it's movie index. If it comes up, remember all that does is this. Okay? Now it says the top menu bar with the text application name and copyright symbol is part of the layout and thus will be available to every page. All right? I didn't even notice it. Is it there? I don't know. No. Hopefully when we get back from break, it will be. So let's take a break. It's 1:31. Let's come back at 1:46, please.